Excellent, so welcome. I'm Joe Thompson. We'd like to welcome you to the launch of a new online historical resource for Lowestoft. OurFallen gives details including home addresses of people from Lowestoft and surrounding villages lost in the 2 world wars, honouring and remembering their sacrifice. It's a project of Lowestoft Old and Now that, would you believe, also has a website, LowestoftOldandNow.org, and it's building into a useful set of resources for the community, including a virtual street stroll, allowing you to learn about existing businesses and also how buildings have changed over the years, a history timeline, I should have done that, never mind, a men's shed section and a recycling section, with many other things, including a recycling map, allowing you to filter by material and the nearest location. The website is run by myself and John Ellaby. If you have an idea for a project that you'd like our help with or would like to be involved in what we're up to, then see John at the end, or the details are on our leaflet. So that's the gratuitous plug over. So the inspiration for our OurFallen project came from an existing project, Fieldstone Remembers, where, as you can see, they identified where people had lived, added poster signs to the relevant streets, and to me, this brought history to life and made me wonder if we could do something similar for Lowestoft. Darren Aitchison is here from the Fieldstone project, and I've asked him if he can tell us about his project after the demonstration and the Q&As. Back to the concept of OurFallen. I soon discovered that the information for Lowestoft was incomplete and fragmented, but we felt that we could do a worthwhile project if we brought together the various sources, presented them online, and found a simple way for the community to search and also contribute back to the project. But a worthwhile project turned into a truly exceptional project when we were lucky enough to rope in Damon Rogers, who has much experience with online databases and all things military. Because key to this resource is the quality of the research and the resulting information. So I'd like to hand over to Damon, who's done all this exceptional work. Thank you.
So what really sets the OurFallen resource apart and makes it distinct and different from looking up a name on the Commonwealth War Graves or the Roll of Honour websites is that we've tried to be as complete as possible, and I'll come back to that shortly. And we wanted to include 2 contexts. One is a context of memory, because these are not just names and numbers and dates, these are real people. And so we wanted to, as far as possible, give an indication of things that would show us that these are real stories of real people. And so one of the criteria that we went for is to, as far as we can, include family biographical information. We wanted to include parents' names where that was possible. We wanted to include the name of the spouse where that was relevant. And very often on other memorial sites, those pieces of information are omitted. And I won't go too far into the technicalities of all of this. But for us to make sure that we'd got the information about families, we had to interrogate Commonwealth War Graves, I'm sure many of you are familiar with that, but also things like the 1911 census, the 1939 register, many different military records, pension record cards, army register of soldiers' effects and so on. And we had to go through a whole range. And a typical entry on the actual OurFallen website probably takes about 10 minutes to find the information. A difficult entry, probably 2 hours. There's no hard and fast rule, but we had to have that criteria, context of memory, and linking to the families. And the second context is the context of geography or place. We want the names of these people to be linked to particular places, to the places where they lived especially. And so, where possible, we found a relevant address for that person or their family at the date closest to the point in time at which they died. Again, we had to go through quite a few resources to find that. And a particular problem was the Second World War records. And again, I won't go into too much technical stuff about that. There were a number of online resources that we consulted. I'm going to turn to that in just a moment. But for example, you can go online and you can find a particular PDF where you can download a whole list of names that are on the different war memorials in Lowestoft, but they do not have those two, we feel, vital piece of information. That's what sets this apart. So there were 3 start points, and here on the screen you have an image from Commonwealth War Graves. And we do note that we are building on foundations that have already been laid. One of the key foundations is the Commonwealth War Graves website and all of their records, and the second one, the other key foundation, is the Roll of Honour website, but I'll come back to that shortly. So Joe started all of this off by importing information from Commonwealth War Graves using a keyword Lowestoft. Now you would think, wouldn't you, that if you put in the keyword Lowestoft you'd get all the information that you want. But actually, families for various reasons did not put in their details or their addresses. And the Commonwealth War Graves records can only reflect the information that they were given. So it does lead to anomalies, it does lead to issues. We had to go through the first set of data to take out addresses that included the word Lowestoft but were nothing to do with Lowestoft. And no offence to anybody from Galston who may be with us today, but Lowestoft Road, Galston did not fall within our criteria. It's Lowestoft, the town, and its immediate area we were interested in. And there are also some errors in Commonwealth War Graves records, and we've just picked out one that's pertinent to Lowestoft, Arthur Peake. And he actually has 2 different memorialisations, but it was only one person. And the error arose because they didn't understand that he was actually in the 11th Cambridgeshire Battalion of the Suffolk Regiment. He wasn't in the Cambridgeshire Regiment. So there are things like that we had to work through. We solved this by looking at a document called the Army Register of Soldiers' Effects, and that's very clear. May we have a look at the Roll of Honour screenshot? So Roll of Honour is a really fantastic website. The idea is that they transcribe websites from across the whole of the country. And what happened in Lowestoft is that volunteers went and they visited many of the war memorials in the Lowestoft area, transcribed them, and then began to do research. And you'll see typical entries there on the screen. The majority of the transcripts for the Lowestoft area were completed on or before 2014. And they were fantastic for their time. But since 2014 through to now, a whole different series of records have become available to the general public. And so things that they had to guess at or couldn't complete, we've been able to go through and double check, and we are convinced that the OurFallen website is as accurate as possible at this point in time. Just to illustrate three things that crop up though, you'll notice the entrance there for W.C. Goddard. You'll see in red the keyword probably. Again, going back to 2014, that was a good best guess. I can tell you that entry is actually incorrect. The W.C. Goddard from Lowestoft was in a different regiment, had overlapping names, and to verify that we had to look at pension record cards. So we know that that entry is incorrect and the one on OurFallen is correct. You'll notice further down, Godfrey R.C., again, they didn't have access to particular records. They were able to tell from the Lowestoft Memorial Book that he was a petty officer in the Royal Navy, and we were able to take that information. We interrogated all of the online Royal Navy service records for anybody called Godfrey, and we did find R.C. Godfrey, Robert Charles, and he actually left the Navy in 1918 and then spent the next 2 years in hospital, and he died in 1920. So the entry on the OurFallen builds on this and includes the other data. And then you'll notice there's Charles Gooch and there's Charles Samuel Gooch. So when we had 2 entries like that, what we did is searched all of the available online civil records for anybody called Charles Gooch, who may have been born in the Lowestoft area. And what I can tell you is there was only one Charles Gooch. Charles Samuel is your man. And for some reason, and it happens quite a lot in the Lowestoft Town Memorial, there were duplicate entries. And this is just another duplicate entry, but we've been able to prove that for the OurFallen website by going through all of the records. So that is one of the great foundations that we had to build on, and we're so thankful for Martin Edwards, who originated that project. But as I say, it was a foundation, and what we hope we're able to deliver and offer is built on that and goes further than that. And then there was one other resource, if we can go on the screen please, Joe. There we are. And these were war memorials that hadn't otherwise been transcribed in any form. There's one of the ones we had to look at from Kirkley, and what we had to do with this is to go through every name. We had to check it against the information we already had, and when we found a name that we didn't have any information for, we had to do the research and make sure the entry was correct for the OurFallen website. Across the whole of the town, there are over 30 different memorialisations, panels and plaques such as this, the book that accompanies the town memorial down by the harbour, and some churches have memorial books. And we've done some more work on it this week. It's as up to date as possible, and of the 31, we have 30 that are included. So we're pretty close to being 100% coverage within that. On the OurFallen website itself, at the moment there's 1,903 individuals that have been listed. So for each of those individuals, we've had to go through all the different records that are available. I mentioned earlier that there was a problem with the Second World War, and that's because a lot of the records do not include specific addresses, whereas First World War records tend to include them. And just to give you a little bit more of statistics, around about 1,200 of the names are connected with the First World War, around about 700 with the Second World War, of which over 200 are civilians from the Lowestoft area. And I think we're going to go to a demonstration now. Oh no, we're going to, yes, sorry, apologies Joe, yes. This is a list, it's out of date now, of the various war memorials that we've included. So you see that we've included a number of the villages close to Lowestoft. We've tried to include every memorial that we know exists within Lowestoft. And you know, we did have issues with some places such as Rushmer, because there are 2 Rushmers in Suffolk. And so if you just did a search on Commonwealth War graves using Rushmer, you would get all the ones from Ipswich as well as all the ones from the Greater Lowestoft area. Right, on to the important stuff.
So you can search the database in many ways. The key thing is that we've got one search box, but that searches every field. So we've made it as simple as possible. So typically you might search by a surname, and so if we put in here Poppy, connection's really slow, my apologies, there we go.
So we wanted to give you just one example to illustrate. Firstly, you'll see the information that comes through on the website. It's very basic information, but we think it's enough that it's going to make it useful for people when they want to do a search. If you hover over the name, you also get a little box with further information. And this is where we've tended to put the biographical detail and also any other things that have been interesting or relevant. You'll notice that for Harry Poppy we have a photograph, and as far as possible we want to include photographs of the individuals. Do we know how many we have so far? It's about 70?
It's about 70 or 80.
70 or 80, which is really good. And we'll just tell you a little bit of a story about Harry Poppy. The reason why we have his photograph is that Joe put out a post and somebody responded to it and offered a photograph of him. And this particular individual knew that Harry had a fiancée, and it was a photograph of the couple together, taken during the war, probably just after he enlisted. You'll notice some information there. So he was from Lowestoft. He joined the Royal Army Medical Corps. There was a territorial unit of the Royal Army Medical Corps based in Lowestoft, and they all had very low two-figure numbers. His number was 89, and he joined in February of 1915, and his unit were going to go out to Gallipoli, to the Gallipoli campaign, and they were a medical unit to support the 54th East Anglian Division. Don't know if any of you can remember a TV thing about the First World War with David Jason called All the King's Men. Yeah. Some of you might remember that. That was the 54th East Anglian Division, and these would have been the medics to go out and support them. You'll notice also there's a little tag below the date. Can you see it says Royal Edward sinking? So we've been able to put some tags in, and let's just have a look what that brings up for you just now, because these all add to the story. Yeah, so just remember you've got to put the gaps in. Okay. So actually, if you look at the page and you see what comes up, is that there's quite a few people who were on the Royal Edward when it was sunk. And what actually happened to Harry and his friends here from the 54th or 1st East Anglian Casualty Clearing Station is that they went down to Devonport. They all got on this troop ship called the Royal Edward. That sailed over to Alexandria, and it was sailing up to Gallipoli. And on the 13th of August 1915, a submarine dispatched a torpedo that sank the ship. There was getting on for 1,400 people on that ship at that point in time, of which we know at least 950 died. So all of those chaps, that's what happened to them, and these are all guys from Lowestoft. So if you go to the website, if you see those tags, Royal Edward sinking, for example, we just introduced one for Bomber Command. There's one for the Waller Raid, and other key events. Far East Prisoners of War, that bring up lots of results. So that's two features there, and there's also the capacity to search things by street. And so we're going to look at Anguish Street, which will come up here, so you can see the results there. Now we chose Anguish Street because it's one of those streets that doesn't exist anymore. And when you look at the things that Joe has done with the technical wizardry, you'll see how he's been able to incorporate those kind of details. Not many people from Anguish Street there, but we'll just hover on one. Can we hover over Theophilus? There we are. And just to give you a little bit of detail about him, so he volunteered in late 1915, He went over to France in 1916. He was with the 1st 4th Battalion Suffolk Regiment. So the reason for choosing him was to remind people that back in those days, the territorial force, the Territorial Association in Lowestoft, provided a company of soldiers for the 1st 4th Battalion. And he was actually shell-shocked in July of 1916, returned to the trenches, and then on the 1st of November 1916 they were involved in a particular attack, and Theophilus and about a dozen other people from the battalion were killed and a similar number wounded. So there's a fairly typical example, but if you look at Theophilus as well, underneath the date, you'll notice we've put in pension record card. And for some of these entries, what we've tried to do is to give people a clue where to go next to get information, or where we've used and found a primary source to help us with the research. Okay, so you can search by street, but you'll have noticed further up there's 2 other things in red, and Joe's going to click on families for us just now. And we thought it was interesting to show the families most affected. And you'll see there's, you know, if you stop at any particular place, you'll see there's various names from various families. But we thought, just to illustrate this for you, we'd look at the Redgrave family. And can you just hover over Eleanor for us? That's great, thank you. So, to tell you a little bit of the story there, going a generation further back to Eleanor's parents, who were Edmund and Anna Maria, they had 9 children in all, and 2 of their sons went off to the First World War and didn't come back. And then the Second World War came along, and you will know about the high toll of civilians, and Eleanor and her sister Susanna and 2 of Eleanor's daughters were sheltering at St Leonard's Road, and they were all killed. And it just illustrates the multi-generational nature of the impact of the World Wars. Losing 2 sons in the First World War, 2 daughters and 2 granddaughters in the Second World War. And then, if we go to one other feature that's on the website, streets most affected. Now, like most of us in Lowestoft, we have to navigate a long journey through London Road, which we thought we'd avoid. Come down to Raglan Street, and it's a street very close to where I live and where I work. And we just wanted to pick on one name, and Laura Besant should appear there somewhere. Okay, so we just hover over the details there. And we just wanted to say, clearly, obviously, given the context of the First World War and the Second World War, most of the people on the database are men, but we mustn't ignore the contributions of the women during the 2 World Wars. And Laura was a Wren. She was at HMS Minos here in Lowestoft, and those of you that are Lowestoft historians will know the date, the 13th of January 1942, and the word Waller, and about the Waller raid. And apparently she was with other Wrens at the cafe, 3 of whom were killed, one of whom, I'm just going to tell you her name, Joan Bosdet. If you ever get down to the Imperial War Museum, Joan contributed all of her memoirs, including her account of being wounded in the Waller raid. So that's down there. So this just illustrates the fact that you can go to the families that were most affected and the streets that were most affected. Coming back to those 2 key criteria of the stories of real people, therefore we want the biographical information, and the stories that connect to the geography, which is why we want to put the addresses in there. Okay, Joe.
Excellent. So you can also click on any of the headings. So for instance, if you clicked on died on, you'd have the earliest death of the 2 world wars, the latest one. Age is obviously interesting to see the oldest person and the youngest person. And also if you click on service and branch, you then see all of the Army and Navy ones together, and then civilians, which can also be helpful. If you click on any of these links, email me Harry for it, spam it, we've got that picture. We've got that picture. Edward, for instance. So if you were a relative and you had a picture of Edward Garrett, if you click on that link, it opens up a new email and allows people to actually add a photo directly into it. So we see this as the first phase. We're hoping that in future this might expand into a complete website with individual pages for every person, but we're hoping that this is a resource that Lowestoft can be proud of and we can build on it, and that's where we need your help. So thank you very much. If we take some questions